The notes in my garden. Mom and I had just moved into our new home, an old Victorian house filled with antique furniture. Old books, pictures coated in dust, and sad-looking dolls rested against the peeling wallpaper, each of them forgotten, their meaning and memories dissipated around them. It was the kind of house that you would expect a witch to live in. In fact, the house was very much like a witch, an outcast amongst the pretentious neighborhood. There was a particularly odd room near the back of the house which seemed to have once been a child's. All the light bulbs in the room had been hidden beneath the bed. The single window was barricaded with planks of wood, and in the center of the floor, a forgotten pen lay vulnerable. Nothing was mentioned of the previous owners. No one seemed to know who had lived there before we moved in, all their belongings left unwanted. The backyard presented us with a large, abandoned cottage garden. Dried-up lavender and uncut sunflowers lined the gravel paths, their petals pulled back in thirst, their heads limp in submission. Threading through the lifeless stems were thistles and nettles, towering into the sky. A row of garden arcs, suffocated in dead climbing roses, lead to a dilapidated seating arrangement in the center. My mother called this potential. I called it work. A few days after we had moved in, I was helping my mom rehabilitate the graveyard of plants, when I noticed a sort of stone structure hidden amongst the jungle of weeds. I walked over and pulled away a curtain of thistles, revealing a water well. It was made of gray stone, splattered with moss. The wooden roof decayed with lichen, and a rusty tin bucket hovered dauntingly over the tunneling hole. I placed my hands onto the cold stone and peered over the edge. Further and further it traveled into the earth, morphing into darkness, penetrating into oblivion. The following morning I was sawing away at a brown, shriveled vine, strangling a garden arc, while my mum was pulling out dead geraniums. Exhausted by the work, I sat on the rusted table set. It shifted onto 3 legs as I lowered my body. I was looking around myself, in the center of the dried-up garden, when I noticed the well. The bucket wasn't there anymore. It had been lowered out of sight. I walked over to the stone perimeter and peered down. The rope hung far, the bucket nowhere to be seen. Cool air seemed to rise from below. I grabbed the wooden handle that stuck out of its side and began to rotate, creaked as the rope coiled around its neck. Eventually, the metal bucket came into view. There was something resting at the bottom, a piece of white cloth, frayed at the edges. I reached in and unraveled it. Badly embroidered in black string was the word, "Welcome." I called my mum over straight away and showed her what I had found. "The bucket wasn't lowered yesterday," I said. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Positive. Someone did this." The next morning I was eating breakfast in the sunroom, baking in the natural light against the winter air, when I noticed the bucket had been lowered into the well again. I could see it from the back window. "It's done it again," Mum said, walking up to me. We walked out through the lifeless garden, the gravel crunching beneath our feet, until we reached the rotting well. I peered over the edge into the darkness, the rope swaying eerily in the center. Mum grabbed the handle and started reeling the rope. The bucket rose into view, this time holding another piece of white cloth. In the same embroidery, barely readable, was the word, "More." "Who's leaving these here?" Mum said. "You're not pulling a prank, are you?" I rolled my eyes and suggested that tonight we stay up in the sunroom to catch whoever was leaving these notes behind. Mum agreed. As the night invaded, we finished dinner and set ourselves up in 2 armchairs, facing the garden. It was 9 p.m. We were wrapped in blankets and shared a hot pot of coffee as the winter air lingered around us like mosquitoes. There were 2 lights at the back of the garden, almost like lampposts. They didn't help much, but were bright enough for us to distinguish the well. "It's exciting, isn't it?" Mum said. "We might catch a ghost." "Or just a lunatic," I replied. An hour later, Mum began to tire in her chair and eventually drifted off to sleep. The window began to grow a mist as the night became colder, making it even harder to look into the night. I got out of my chair and moved to the window, pulling up my sleeve to wipe the fog away, when I saw something. It was in the well. Something was growing out of the center. 2 things. 2 hand-shaped things. clawed and bony, so large that they completely covered the bucket as they closed over it like a Venus flytrap. Then they pulled downwards, so fast the handle spun like a propeller, the rope uncoiling like a kite string. "Mum, wake up! There's something in the well." Her forehead wrinkled and her eyes blinked as she came to. "It's not a person," I said. "Something just pulled the bucket down." She looked at me disbelievingly and walked over to the window, squinting into the night. The well was still. "Should we go and reel it up now?" she asked. My eyes widened. "There's no way I'm going out there." "Oh, don't be so afraid," she smiled. "You said it yourself, you didn't see anyone out there." Before I could argue, she had opened the door and was walking down the path. I ran to the doorway. "Mum, what are you doing?" I whispered. She ignored me and continued on through the jungle of weeds. I stood at the door frame, frozen. She had left with her blanket wrapped around her, shaping her like a ghost, weaving down the path. The crunching of gravel under her footsteps slowly softened until I was watching a muted scene of silhouettes. The lights at the back of the garden flickered as insects orbited around them. I watched the shape of my mother slowly approach the well. She looked over the edge cautiously, holding her blanket to her chest. She lowered a hand onto the handle to begin rotating, but it seemed to be stuck. She placed both her hands on the handle and tried again. Still, it wouldn't budge. "Mom, get back here," I whispered harshly. I watched as her figure peered over the edge once again before walking back towards the house, her blanket flourishing behind her. My attention was drawn back to the well. Something was coming out of it. Two things. The silhouettes of two large hands crept out like tarantulas and silently placed themselves on the sides of the well. Each finger separately descended onto the stone. I stood at the door watching my oblivious mum as something began to rise behind her. She was walking so tediously, passing through the garden arcs completely unaware of the horror. The space between the well and its roof slowly filled with a dark mass. "Mom," I hissed. "Hurry up." The wooden roof of the well creaked and groaned as the figure inside began to forcefully swell against it. Mum stopped at the noise and turned around just as the two giant hands extended out of the well, fingers spread, and wrapped around the roof. The roof of the well splintered and cracked, falling to the sides as a black shape lifted up and slumped heavily into the shrubbery, hidden in the forest of tall weeds. Mum looked around, petrified in the middle of the yard, holding her blanket close like a shield. The plants rustled and collapsed as the creature slithered through them, stalking its prey. "Mom," I yelled. "Run!" The rustling trail of movement raced towards her. She turned and ran, the gravel flying up behind her, her blanket dropping to the ground. I stood at the doorway in shock. There was nothing I could do but hope she made it back. A garden arc collapsed to the ground behind her, just as she tripped and fell. She stumbled back to her feet as a giant skeletal hand reached out from the weeds and swiftly caught onto her shirt, tearing it and retracting into the shrubs. She ran through the garden arcs, each one that passed leaving her closer to the house. The thing from the well got closer and closer. Plants separated abruptly as it made its rumbling path behind her. The last bit of gravel sprayed behind her as she tripped through the doorway. I grabbed the door and slammed it shut behind her, fumbling the lock until it latched. I stood back, Mum crouching on the floor, both of us waiting in terror. The garden was silent, the lights illuminating the destruction. Suddenly, something bashed on the door. We moved back, bashed again, then again even harder. The wood splintered. My mum grabbed one of the armchairs and pushed it against the door. We ran into the conjoining room, resting our backs against the wall. Another bash on the door sent the armchair skidding across the room. We watched in horror from behind the wall as a final bash created a massive hole in the center of the door. There was a moment of calm before a huge night-black fist silently entered through the hole, the size of a lion's skull. It hovered above the floor and slowly unraveled its long, needle-like fingers, letting a piece of white cloth float to the ground. The hand retracted through the hole, its claws tapping against the splintered wood as they left. We listened on alert as it slid loudly through the gravel and brushed through the weeds. It left us with a loud moaning drone, as it retreated down the well. My mom and I didn't speak a word as we came out of our hiding place and stared at the gaping hole in the door. The cold air whistled through, tumbling the cloth that had been left behind. I leant over and picked it up. Embroidered with string was the same word: more. We spent the rest of the night packing our suitcases. We would move in with my grandparents and begin our search for another house. As we waited for the taxi, I stood in the mysterious child's room, staring at the planks of wood nailed across her window. They tried to keep it out, I thought. I looked at the barricade, a feeble attempt at protection, the brittle pieces of wood striping the window in vain. Cracks in the wall spread from where the nails had been hastily driven in. As I pondered what happened in the room, I noticed a tiny triangle peeking out of the wood. On closer inspection, I realized it was a folded piece of paper, wedged between the window frame and one of the planks. I pulled at the corner until it released and carefully unfolded it. It was a messy letter, the paper yellowed, its border flaking. The ink had faded, but I could still make out what it said. It's been 6 days since Mother was taken. She didn't listen. I told her to leave them, but she ignored the notes. I told her that he wasn't happy. He takes the bucket down every night. I see him from my window. He lives down there. I think he likes the roots. That's why he wanted us to leave them. I think he eats them. That's why everything keeps dying. And if he doesn't have enough roots, he gets hungry. Really hungry and angry, but Mother kept pulling out the plants. I begged her not to. It was after dinner when it happened. We heard a groaning coming from the well. I told her it was his stomach, but she just slapped me and sent me to my room. All I could do was watch from the window as she went over to the edge. Took her. I grabbed her and dragged her in. It was starving. She was screaming. I didn't know what to do. I went to the fireplace and nailed planks across my window. Every day I've gone to the nursery and put plants in. But he eats so fast. He eats so much. I'm running out of Mother's money and I can't tell anyone. No one's going to believe me. I can't keep doing this. I don't want to be alone anymore. I just want my mother back. I just want to be with her again. So I'm going into the well tonight. To be with her. I'm going to wear my white nightgown, just like Mother was wearing hers. And then we can live down there together. Forever. Pigface. In the depths of rural America, there existed a small, forgotten town called Willow Creek. Nestled amidst cornfields and abandoned farmland, it was a place where time seemed to stand still. The residents of Willow Creek lived simple lives, eking out meager existences from the arid soil. Among them was a man known only as Pigface. His real name was lost to the annals of time, but the moniker stuck due to an unsettling deformity. His face resembled that of a pig more than a human being. The snout-like protrusion, beady black eyes, and coarse, pinkish skin made him an outcast among the already isolated community. Pigface dwelled on the outskirts of town, in a dilapidated farmhouse that creaked and groaned with each gust of wind. He spent most days alone, tending to his garden of twisted, gnarled plants that defied explanation. Their leaves shimmered with an unnatural sheen, and their roots seemed to writhe beneath the earth. Some claimed they could hear strange, guttural whispers emanating from the vegetation at night. Rumors swirled through Willow Creek about Pigface's true nature. Some said he was a witch, practicing dark magic under the cover of darkness. Others whispered that he was a demon in disguise, biding his time until he could unleash hell upon the world. Children were warned never to stray near his property, lest they fall under his sinister spell. One fateful evening, a group of brave teenagers decided to investigate the rumors. Armed with flashlights and a mix of curiosity and fear, they crept up the overgrown driveway leading to Pigface's farmhouse. As they approached, an eerie silence fell over the landscape, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. The front door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior heavy with the scent of decay and something almost sweet. Cobwebs clung to the rafters, and dust coated every surface. In the center of the room stood an ancient, wooden table, its surface scarred and stained. Suddenly, a low, grunting noise echoed through the house, causing the teens to freeze. Sounded like laughter? The sound grew louder, more manic, until it seemed to come from all directions at once. Then, Pig Face emerged from the shadows, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He moved with an unnatural gait, his pig-like features contorted into a grotesque grin. The teens tried to flee, but found themselves rooted in place, unable to move or look away from the horror before them. Pig Face, one of them stammered, voice trembling. What are you?" The creature let out another chilling laugh, its voice like the squealing of pigs mixed with the cackling of witches. "I am the harbinger of change," it rasped, "the bringer of new life from old death." As he spoke, the air around the teens began to distort and ripple, as if reality itself was bending to Pig Face's will. The ground shook, and the sky turned a sickly shade of green. The plants outside the window started to twist and contort, their leaves unfurling into nightmarish shapes. One by one, the teens felt a strange sensation wash over them, as if their very essence was being pulled apart and rearranged. They screamed in terror as their bodies began to shift and mutate, their limbs elongating, their faces stretching into grotesque parodies of their former selves. When the transformation was complete, 4 new creatures stood in the farmhouse, their forms a fusion of human and animal. 2 had the bodies of wolves, while the other 2 possessed the serpentine coils of snakes. Yet, despite their monstrous appearances, a glimmer of humanity remained in their eyes, a spark of recognition that they were once those frightened teens. Pig Face watched with satisfaction as his latest creations took their first tentative steps. "Welcome to your new existence," he croaked, "children of the abyss, born from the womb of chaos." As the newly transformed beings stumbled out into the night, Pig Face retreated back into the shadows, his work done for now. The farmhouse creaked and settled, its walls absorbing the horrors within. Outside, the mutated plants continued to grow, their tendrils snaking across the countryside, spreading their corrupt influence. In the years that followed, whispers of the events in Willow Creek faded into local legend. But deep in the heart of the corrupted landscape, Pig Face waited patiently, nurturing his twisted garden and plotting his next move. For in a world where the boundaries between man and beast blurred, he was the master of the in-between, the conductor of a symphony of madness and despair. And so, the nightmare continued, hidden from prying eyes, yet always lurking just beyond the edge of perception, ready to consume all in its path.